I want to begin by being very careful about my own title, because China isn't rising anymore. It already won this round is a phrase that sounds triumphalist. And triumphalism is exactly the register I most want to avoid, because it is both intellectually dishonest and practically useless, and because the simple story of one civilization winning and another losing is almost always false. So let me foreclose the misreading immediately and completely. When I say it already won this round, I do not mean that China has won the contest or won the future or that the West is finished, and I am not making that argument. And if you came here for a story of Chinese triumph and Western defeat, you will not find it, because that story is false and one-sided, and it ignores both China's genuine vulnerabilities and the West's genuine and durable strengths. The two words that carry the entire weight of my meaning, the two words I want you to hold on to, are this round, not the contest, not the future. This round, a specific bounded competition in a specific domain over a specific period, whose outcome is, I would argue, already settled, already a past tense fact, and not the open and future question that the conversation still treats it as. And the thumbnail phrase that we are arguing about a race that is over captures the real subject, which is not Chinese triumph at all, but the lag between reality and the conversation about it, the way we keep debating as open the questions that reality has already closed. That is what I actually want to talk about. Not who won, but the strange and costly gap between when a thing is actually decided and when the conversation catches up. Let me be careful, as always, about the two extremes, because this subject pulls people hard toward one of them, and both are wrong, and here the danger is especially acute because the title leans toward one of them. The first extreme is the triumphalist narrative, the reading of it already won as a decisive and total victory, China ascendant and the West defeated, the contest settled in China's favor, and this is wrong. Badly wrong? Both because it mistakes a bounded round for the whole contest, and because it ignores the genuine vulnerabilities that make China's future far from assured, and the genuine strengths that keep the West leading in domains that matter enormously. And the second extreme is the comfortable dismissal, the insistence that nothing is settled, that the West remains dominant everywhere, that the concerns are overblown, that the race is still to be run, and the West is still ahead in it. And this is also wrong, because it refuses to acknowledge that some rounds genuinely have been decided. And it is precisely the refusal that keeps the conversation arguing about a settled outcome as though it were open. The truth is neither triumph nor dismissal. The truth is that a specific round has been decided, that this is not the whole contest, that other rounds remain genuinely open, and that the interesting and useful thing is the lag between the settled reality and the conversation that has not caught up to it. So let me start by being scrupulous about the scope, about what this round actually is, because the entire honesty of the reflection depends on the bounds. The competition between economies is not one race. It is many rounds across many domains, unfolding over different periods. And to speak of one side winning without qualification is to commit exactly the error of the simple story. This round, the one I claim is settled, is a specific one. The build-out of physical, industrial, and manufacturing capability, the accumulation of ecosystem depth in the making of things at scale, the construction of the infrastructure and the supply chains, and the tacit knowledge of production, that round, I would argue, is already decided, already a past tense fact, largely settled. And I want to be equally clear about what this round is not. It is not the whole contest. Other rounds are genuinely open, and some of the most important ones are wide open. The frontier of the most transformative technology of the age in particular, where the West leads in significant respects and where the outcome is very much still to be determined. And China carries genuine vulnerabilities that make its future rounds far from assured, real problems in its property sector, real demographic pressures, real questions about the sustainability of aspects of its model. And these are not trivial, and they mean that winning this round is no guarantee of winning the next. So when I say it already won this round, I mean a bounded, specific, past tense claim about one particular completed competition, and I want to hold those bounds scrupulously. Because the moment they are dropped, the claim becomes the false triumphalist story I am trying to avoid. The principles that determine how to read which competitions are settled and which are open, how to distinguish a bounded round that has been decided from the larger contest that has not, are worth studying deliberately and as a connected whole, and there is a body of work that lays them out carefully, called the Naval Codex. It is not a geopolitical forecast, and it is not a set of tactics. It is a systematic account of the underlying principles that determine who reads structural reality accurately, including the reality of which questions are already answered and which remain open, rather than mistaking the one for the other. If you want to engage with those principles directly, it is linked in the description, and there is a code on the screen you can scan to reach it. And engaging with the principles directly is what matters, because the skill of distinguishing the settled from the open generalizes far beyond any single competition, and the competitions it applies to will always be different. Now let me develop why this particular round is over, why I use the past tense. Because the distinction between rising and having risen is the crux. To say China is rising is to use the present progressive to describe something still happening, still in question, still to be determined. And for a long time, that was the correct tense, because the build-out was genuinely in progress and its outcome was genuinely open. But there comes a point in the building of a thing when it has been built, when the present progressive is no longer accurate and the past tense becomes the truth. And I would argue that in this specific domain, the industrial and manufacturing build-out, that point is past. The manufacturing ecosystem, with its extraordinary depth, its density of suppliers and engineers and accumulated tacit knowledge, exists. It has been built. The infrastructure exists. The industrial capability exists. And this ecosystem is precisely the kind of thing that took a generation to build and cannot be quickly replicated. A compounding accumulation of knowledge and relationships and capability that is genuinely difficult for any competitor to reproduce on any short horizon. So this is not China is rising, present, progressive, still in question. This is China rose, past tense, in this specific domain, done. The ecosystem is built, the capability is accumulated, and that round, the industrial build-out, is decided not because I am cheering for the outcome, but because the past tense is simply the accurate description of a thing that has already been built. And here is the meta point, the thing I actually want you to sit with, because it is the real subject, and it applies far beyond this one case. The conversation lags reality. We keep arguing about whether something will happen when it has already happened. The public conversation, the ambient debate about whether China will catch up, whether it will build a capability, whether the rise will continue, persists in the present, progressive, and future tense, in the framing of an open question still to be determined, long after reality has settled the question in the past tense. And this is the meaning of arguing about a race that is over. We are debating an outcome that has already been decided in this specific domain as though it were still to be decided, because the conversation was built on frameworks and narratives that formed when the question was genuinely open, and it persists in treating the question as open long after the reality has closed it. The conversation lags reality, sometimes by years, and this lag is not unique to this subject. It is a general feature of how collective conversation trails the reality it describes, always debating in the tense that was accurate a few years ago rather than the tense that is accurate now. Let me develop why this lag is costly, because it is not a harmless curiosity, it has real consequences, and the consequences connect directly to how you position yourself. The cost of the lag is this. While you are debating whether something will happen, it has already happened, and the time to respond to it was before it happened, and you missed the window because you were still arguing about whether it would occur. If a round is already decided, and you are still treating it as an open question, then you are failing to respond to a settled reality, positioning yourself for a future that has already become the past while you debated it. And nowhere is this more consequential than in the monetary domain, where the conversation is still largely arguing about whether the dollar's privileges will erode, whether the shift will come, whether the concerns are valid in the future tense as an open question, when the erosion is, I would argue, already underway, a process already in motion in the present tense, and the time to respond to it is now, not once the conversation has finally caught up to a reality that will by then be well advanced. The lag in the monetary conversation, the persistence in debating as future what is already present, is exactly the kind of costly lag I am describing, and it leaves those who trust the conversation positioned for a question still open when the reality has already begun to answer it. The way capital actually moves, once a monetary shift has moved from the future tense of the conversation to the present tense of reality, where it flows and why, and what happens to those who kept arguing about whether it would happen versus those who recognized that it already was, is worth understanding in its specific mechanics rather than in vague outline, and there is a framework that traces exactly this, called the Dragon Pivot. Despite the name, it is not really about any single country. It is about how monetary transitions unfold across history, how the conversation lags the reality, and how those who recognized the present tense reality before the conversation caught up positioned themselves accordingly. You can reach it through the code shown on the screen or through the link in the description for anyone who wants the fuller picture. And that picture matters here precisely because the monetary shift is the clearest current example of a reality that the conversation is still debating as future while it is already unfolding in the present. This brings me to what you actually do, which is to develop the skill of distinguishing the settled rounds from the open ones and to position for reality rather than for the lagging conversation. Because the practical lesson is not to conclude that China won everything, which would be the triumphalist error, and it is not to conclude that nothing is settled, which would be the dismissive error. The practical lesson is to recognize, for any given question, whether it is a settled round that should be responded to as a fact, or a genuinely open round whose outcome is still to be determined, and to position accordingly based on the reality rather than on the conversation that lags it. And in positioning, this means holding a position grounded in the reality of where genuine productive capability actually is in the present tense, rather than in the framing that the lagging conversation provides. Which means owning genuine productive assets grounded in the reality of the world as it now is, rather than the fragile claims that a conversation still arguing about a settled question would leave you holding. The work of building a position out of genuine productive capability, grounded in the present tense reality rather than in the lagging conversation about it, is worth doing systematically, and there is a framework devoted precisely to that, called the Sovereign Vault. It is concerned with building durable, generationally significant wealth grounded in real productive assets and real institutional protection, the kind of position that responds to reality as it now is, rather than to the conversation that trails it, rather than in the fragile arrangements that a lagging framework mistakes for safety. It is linked below, and the code on the screen will take you straight to it for anyone who wants to go deeper on the question of how to position for the reality rather than the conversation. And that is the practical core of it, because recognizing that the conversation lags reality means little if you continue to position based on the conversation rather than on the reality it has not caught up to. Now, I want to spend real time on the genuinely open rounds, because this is where the honesty of the whole reflection is tested, and I do not want it to be a token gesture. I want it to be a substantial part of the picture, because it is the part that makes the claim true rather than triumphalist. This round is over, but the next rounds are genuinely open, and some of them are the most important rounds of all. The frontier of the most transformative technology of the age, the development and deployment of artificial intelligence at the leading edge, is a genuinely contested round, and the West leads in significant and important respects in the frontier research, in the concentration of elite technical talent, in the capital markets that fund the most ambitious efforts, in the culture of iteration and risk that produces genuine breakthroughs. That round is not decided, and it may not go the way this round went, because it is a different kind of competition, testing different capabilities, and the West's genuine strengths are precisely the strengths that matter most in it. And China carries genuine vulnerabilities into its future rounds, real and serious ones, the difficulties in its property sector working through the consequences of excessive leverage, the demographic pressures that will constrain its trajectory, the genuine questions about whether aspects of its model are sustainable over the long horizons that matter. These are not trivial, and they mean that having won this round, the industrial build-out is no guarantee of winning the next. And the honest picture is not China won, full stop, but China won this round, the West won, and continues to win others. China carries real vulnerabilities into what comes next, and the most important rounds are still genuinely open. That is the even-handed truth, and it is the opposite of the triumphalist reading, and it is the picture I actually hold. I want to think honestly about why the conversation lags, why we keep arguing about races that are over, because understanding the mechanism is the only defense against being captured by it. The first reason is the comfort of the old framework, that the narratives and the frameworks through which we understand a competition formed when the question was open, and they are comfortable and familiar, and updating them requires effort and the acknowledgement that the world has moved on. The second reason is the emotional investment in the narrative, that people who have held a view of an open competition are invested in the openness, in the sense that the outcome is still to be determined, and accepting that a round has been decided, particularly decided unfavorably from their perspective, threatens the investment and is resisted. The third reason is that a collective conversation lags even more than an individual view, because it is a consensus, and a consensus updates more slowly than any individual within it, requiring not just one person, but the whole conversation to shift. And so the collective debate persists in the outdated tense long after some individuals within it have recognized the reality. And the fourth reason, specific to this case, is the peculiar comfort of treating a settled unfavorable outcome as still open, because it might not happen, is more comfortable than it already happened. And the conversation prefers the comfort of the open question, in which the unfavorable outcome is merely possible, to the discomfort of the settled fact in which it has already occurred. And so we keep debating races that are over in the comfortable future tense of the open question, long after the reality has settled them in the past tense of the accomplished fact. I want to be very clear, one final time, about what I am not saying, because the misreadings here are especially dangerous, and I want to foreclose them completely. It already won this round is not China triumphalism, and it is not a claim that the West lost, and it is not a claim about the future or about the overall contest. It is a bounded, specific, past tense claim about one particular round, the industrial build-out, explicitly paired with the acknowledgement that other rounds are genuinely open, that the West leads in several of them, and that China carries real vulnerabilities into what comes next. And this is not essentialism, not a claim about any intrinsic characteristic of any people, which I reject entirely. It is a claim about the outcome of a specific competition over a specific period. And it is not doom, and it is not fear, because recognizing that a round is settled is simply seeing clearly, and it counsels not panic, but the calm response to reality, the positioning for the world as it now is, rather than for the lagging conversation about it. So I want to end, as I always do, not with an exhortation, but with an invitation to see clearly, because this is, in the end, one of the oldest patterns there is, and it is not new. The conversation always lags reality. We always argue about races that are over while imagining they are still to be run, debating in the comfortable tense of the open question long after the reality has settled the matter, because the frameworks are familiar and the investment is real, and the collective consensus updates slowly, and the open question is more comfortable than the settled fact. This is not new. What is new is only the specific circumstance, a particular round that has been decided while the conversation still debates it as open, and a particular monetary shift already unfolding in the present while the conversation still argues about whether it will come, and the particular cost of positioning for a future that has already become the past while you debated whether it would arrive. This round is over, and the next one is open, and the only real mistake is to keep arguing about the one that has already been decided while missing the one that has not. That is the thing I most want to leave you with. Recognize which races are over and respond to them as facts. Recognize which are open and engage them as the genuinely undetermined competitions they are. And position for the reality as it now is, in the present tense, rather than for the conversation that trails it by years. And the value of that clear sight, of reading the true tense of things while the conversation lags, invisible for a long time the way these things always are, through the stretch in which the conversation still debates as open what reality has already closed, and the person who reads the true tense appears merely to be jumping ahead of a question still under discussion, reveals itself the way these things always reveal themselves, which is slowly in the quiet accumulation of decisions grounded in the reality rather than the lagging debate, and then suddenly, at the moment, the settled outcome, argued as open for years, finally becomes undeniable even to the conversation, and the reality that happened long ago is at last acknowledged, and the people who read the true tense early, who recognized the round that was over and the round that was still open, are found to have been, all along, simply the ones who saw the reality before the conversation caught up